I just realized that that of course the brain has a function to, if it knows that a voice is not a good voice, to not listen to it. There is um, the biology in the brain, the network needed to inhibit that voice. So if there's knowledge in one part saying, hey, that voice over there is no good, then that gets used probably by the prefrontal cortex to then send an inhibitory signal to that voice. So what do you need for that to happen? Well, one thing that you need is the knowledge that the voice is incorrect. Otherwise, there's no reason to inhibit it. And we have some error checking mechanisms, but you also need to have the humility for those error checking mechanisms to activate. Error checking in your own thinking and awareness of your own thinking. So maybe sort of more awareness of what is happening in your brain maybe can't be taught, maybe. But even if that can't be taught, what you can do is you can learn the biases that have already been discovered by research and by just people noticing weird things about their thinking, people who have maybe more awareness than other people, I don't know. And then by learning those biases, you know what to look out for. And so then when you have a voice and you have at least the awareness to possibly connect the knowledge of that this bias exists and the activity of that voice, which may be speaking sort of because of that bias, maybe a victim of that bias. It's not a good way of saying it, but I don't like the word bias. Let's use just a rule. So if you know that the rule exists and you see the output, and it may be the output of that rule that you've seen in books, then you can say, hey, I am reacting this way. Of course, I don't know why I'm reacting this way, but it's possible that I'm reacting this way for in this rule that's been listed in the book, this bias. That bias is when you perceive X or believe X, when you perceive or believe Y because of X. That's a rule. So if X, then believe Y. So if you see X, if you hear X, whatever, if you perceive X, then perceive Y. So for instance, if you see a stick on the ground, perceive a snake. That's a rule that exists in the brain. Then there's another rule that, that uses more information and says, well, if it's not moving, if it's whatever, then it is not a living organism, for instance. So the brain is all about the interaction between these rules. Okay. Which means that, or I don't know whether that means what I'm about this, but, right, so if X, then Y. So you've got a voice in your head saying, why? And if X, then Y is not actually a good rule. If A, then Y is a good rule, let's say. And you say, well, there's no A. So for instance, so to use the stick and the snake example, in order to keep it simple, rather than talking about, I guess, an actual bias, and I'm almost trying to keep it under 5 minutes, so I only have a minute left. So using the snake, so there's one rule in the brain that says, if I see a long brown object on the ground, or a long sort of narrow object on the ground, then it's a threat, it's a snake. Then there's another rule that says, if the long narrow object isn't moving, then it's not a snake. Maybe let's even imagine, sort of to simplify things, so this may actually be multiple rules, but let's imagine there's a rule that says, if a long narrow object, a long thin object on the ground is moving in a particular fashion, it seems to be moving with intention because it can't be explained by the wind, whatever, and it is of this size, and it has a head of this shape, then be afraid, or then it is a snake. So that's A that equals A, that if A then Y. But you've got this other rule in your brain, if X then Y, if it's, but it actually could be a stick. So if it's just a long thin object on the ground, be afraid. So that's if X and Y. So if you know that often the brain will perceive, for instance, a stick as a snake, sometimes. I mean, obviously, if you don't grow up around snakes, then that's not going to happen. But if you're in a place where it's possible there are snakes, then that rule is like ready to be activated. Okay? If you've never like seen a snake in your life, obviously you're not freaking out at every stick that you see. But there's that rule that is ready to be activated. So if you say if X, fuck, I didn't keep this under 5 minutes. So if you have this rule, if you have this knowledge, so you have a voice screaming Y, screaming there's a snake. You have the knowledge that we have this rule in our head, if X then Y. You know that the only thing that should actually get to Y is A, which is, again, really a set of conditions. So then you say, wait, A's not there. Oh, but X, that is true. It is a long, thin object. So that's why that voice is screaming Y. And so then once you accept that knowledge, once you have the humility to have said, oh, I'm wrong. And of course, again, it's not a good example to stick in the snake because it's very easy to find out whether you're wrong. And it's automatic as well. But, so if I'm talking about like gods and political ideas and so on. And so then you have to have the humility to say, okay, let me check to see whether there's A, and also let me realize that I know that there's X, and I know that my voice is screaming Y. So it may be that rule, just if X then Y. Of course, it doesn't mean that just because X exists and Y is the output that you're wrong, right? Because it doesn't mean that you use the rule if X then Y. You may have used the rule if X and B and C and D then Y, which we were shortening to if A then Y. So anyway, my only mission, the only thing I really need to do to accomplish my mission is to teach that we have these, that our thinking is basically just an ensemble of rules and the activation of certain rules. If I can teach that information and then encourage and foster in people the humility to use that information, to say, oh, let me learn some of these rules I know are already in my brain and rules that are not particularly reliable, such as if someone looks different from me, then I should distrust them, right? It used to make sense, that rule, when we lived just among people that look different from us, or that look like us, and the people that look different from us were from another tribe and therefore had a reason to threaten us, to be a threat to us. So we realize that actually today, if different color, then bad, or then be afraid, or then threat, that's if X then Y. Of course, there are lots of threats that are different color from you, right? So I'm not saying that just because what I'm saying is just because X doesn't mean Y. What I'm not saying is that, okay, just take a basic logic course. Or maybe I've been saying really dumb stuff, I don't know. Maybe I forgot things from my logic course. So anyway, but you have to have the humility to know that, okay, so my brain is screaming that this person's a threat. It might be because of this bias, this in-group, out-group bias, for instance, which is the one that I'm talking about now. So that's great. But that's what I see. I see people when they don't trust someone or feel weird about someone, there's nothing to slow them down before they get to this person is a threat. There's no humility, no knowledge of the rules, when I say humility, the ability to just imagine that we are able to be wrong about things even when things seem true to us. To be not certain, to be not so confident in our ideas. To say maybe everything I've just said in this video, for instance, is wrong. And I'm happy for you to show me. And as I work on the idea, there's lots of voices that are going, hey, this might be wrong, hey, this is wrong, hey, this is wrong, hey, this is wrong. And I go, okay, is it actually? And then when I hear a voice and it seems like, oh, this is not if X then Y, this is if A then Y, this voice is a good voice. It's considered a good amount of information to form this conclusion. Of course, really, I'm oversimplifying because I think it's, every voice, I don't know what the unit is, but it might be every voice is of the same unit. And which is possible. It's 100 billion neurons. Well, I mean, you lose a good deal of them, but yeah, so it's possible that each unit is just a microscopic rule. If long, then check if thin. Or there's a rule that says if long, then potential threat. Another rule that says if thin, a potential threat. Another rule that says if on the ground, a potential threat. Another rule says if I'm in a place where there are snakes, it's a potential threat. And then when you have enough of those rules, well, that is actually how the brain works. When you have enough neurons exciting another neuron, so you've got neurons 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and they're all connected to neuron 10. And if you've got enough of them sending excitatory signals, then that will activate neuron 10. And neuron 10 is, if these things are true that have activated me, well, and they must be because they've activated me, then whatever the next thing is, be afraid. So it triggers the amygdala and the fear response. Brilliant. Yes. Because sometimes it gets so hopeless as people just go straight for the throat. They say, oh man, yeah, that person's no good. I got bad vibes. And I just feel so hopeless. Are you just not able to realize that it may be something that, especially when you don't even know why you don't like the person, that it may just be if X then Y, that it may be sort of a bad rule, a bad voice in your head, or an incomplete voice in your head? Well, it's a bad voice because it's leading to a conclusion that isn't justified, a Y that isn't justified by X alone. And then it's even worse, maybe. Yeah, because I'm saying especially when you even realize that you don't know why. But what happens is that so X is observed, it triggers Y. So that voice is heard and it is accepted by the rest of the brain. No other voice says, "Hey, shut the fuck up," because we don't have the knowledge that voice exists or the humility to tell ourselves to shut the fuck up. Oh, I guess that's hypocritical of me. I will shut the fuck up in a second. So we've observed X, Y is the output, or it triggers some other neuron or set of neurons, whatever. And then what happens is once Y is triggered, we go check for other things, maybe. We go check to see whether the ensemble that makes up A is actually present. Not particularly good at it, okay, so don't, but there may be some effort to do that in the brain. But then what happens is once we check those things, because we're so ready to see things, remember I told you about being, when you're in a snake infested area, you're going to be more susceptible to boom, boom, where are the snakes, right? Oh, is that a snake? Oh, no, okay. Oh, that's a snake. Oh, no, okay, right? And, whenever you're in a sort of a scary or threatening situation, right? Well, now imagine all of life. That's how the rules are in the brain. They get primed. Sorry it took me so long to use that word for you. Try not to make it. I was not intending to make this video. I was just intending to explain this one idea from my journal. So anyway, so these rules are primed. They're ready to be activated. And sometimes their threshold is too low. So sometimes someone doesn't smile, someone that because they're a different color from you, you're already kind of ready to be off, not like them. So because you got this voice screaming why, it's a threat. Why? You're not really asking why. But let's say you are asking why just a little bit. There's a part of your brain that sort of, that has been triggered to look for further information. And then the person doesn't smile in the right moment. And there's a voice that says, hey, there's a voice in your head that says, if a person doesn't smile, might be a threat. And you can just Google that. And so then because the threatening, the feeling of being threatened is primed and ready to go, because if X then Y. So Y is that? Is that being afraid or being primed, being ready to be afraid? So either already being afraid because of X, or at least being very ready. And then you've got if R, then Y. So if someone isn't smiling, then maybe a threat. And you're already ready, so your threshold is lowered for what becomes a threat, and they tell you off. And then, so then you're like, so then maybe you even start to use that as evidence. You say, he just seems angry to me, right? Because there's another rule in your brain. If someone doesn't smile, then that means that they're angry. So you've got, he's angry, he's a potential threat. And so then you just say in your brain, okay, well, I think he's a potential threat because he seems angry to me. Or it's like the person says something and makes a little joke and smiles, but you don't really understand why they're smiling. And this happened yesterday. There's this guy that hangs out at the collective that I'm at. He just lives nearby and he comes and hangs out. Physically, mentally handicapped. And I had never heard, in the volunteers lesson, there were these two volunteers that were just not talking nicely about him. Like one says, oh yeah, he came by today. I told him there's no room in the kitchen, and so then he left. And the guy doesn't do anything, just sits there. Now apparently, maybe I did find out last night he may have made an inappropriate comment to a woman. But Jesus, I'm sorry, I know the guy is, I gotta tread carefully now. Anyway, but then what she said, so she that was one piece of evidence. The girl who said, I asked him to leave the kitchen, or I told him that there's no room in the kitchen, and he left, and the girl just does not feel bad about this, and there was no way that that the kitchen was that full, and if it was, okay, so then he asked him to leave, but why is this like a story? Yeah, I told him to leave, I got rid of him. Because that was the way that she told it. I said, there's not enough room here in the kitchen. And so one thing that she said was, she said that that he had some inappropriate behavior maybe with someone. And then she also said, because he just sits there, he does nothing, just waits for us to offer him a meal. Oh, also the guy, is unemployed, doesn't have a great life. Doesn't have friends, and that's why he comes and just sits there, doesn't even talk, just kind of observes and listens, look at his phone. He just wants to fucking be around people. But no, he doesn't get up and offer to help with the kitchen. That'd probably be difficult for him to, to figure out, and he'd feel uncomfortable. He would have to do all the social components of that. And so she said that, and is that true that that's something bad, or that something that he does? He just sits around, does nothing, and waits for us to offer him something? Maybe technically he does sit there, sit around. It sounds much lazier than, yeah, he's not doing anything, so you could say it's lazy, but also maybe it's difficult for him to, and maybe he has a sister that told him, hey, go out there and meet people, even if you just, and he's like, oh yeah, there are all these young people in this building across the street from me. And she's like, yeah, go. And, he likes, when I talk to him, he likes it. Alex used to talk to him a lot. And he likes to be talked to. But anyway, and she didn't have the humility to realize, hey, maybe I just don't like this guy because he's fucking weird. And maybe just makes me uncomfortable. And then another guy chimed in, and he had said, sometimes you feel like he's trying to make fun of you or something. And so that's what started this story. Because I was thinking there's a rule in the brain that if someone smiles and you don't understand why, it might be a threat, right? Because they know something maybe that you don't. Or maybe they're reducing your social status and you're not understanding that that's what's happening. And that's a problem. But sometimes it's just because you're talking to someone who's weird, and things that don't make you laugh make them laugh, and also you didn't actually quite understand what they were trying to communicate, or maybe they misunderstood what you were trying to communicate. So that's 3 easy reasons that probably happen all the time for why someone who is weird, who interprets things differently from you and communicates differently, is going to laugh when you don't expect it. But because you don't have the humility to realize that just because I have this why being yelled in my head doesn't mean that why is actually true. And because you don't have the knowledge that we we will automatically distrust people, for instance, who smile when we don't understand why they're smiling. And so when we feel like we are maybe missing information, because you can understand why that would be a problem, right? If someone is smiling at you and you don't know why, then that could mean that they have information, or they have a plan, or they're satisfied that you're doing something for them and you don't realize that you're doing it for them. And all these things are disadvantageous for your survival and reproduction. Is that clear? I hope that's obvious. It's okay if it's not obvious to you, but it's just I don't have time to. I just keep getting so off track. But I might as well just, because I guess it is important. So if someone has a plan unfolding that you do not have information about, if you are not in on the joke, if someone does not have a plan, it has a plan that is unfolding and it is successful and you do not know about it, and for some reason they are thinking about it while they are talking to you, well, it might be because their friend is running up behind you and about to stab you. It might be because you're saying something that they're going to use against you socially. It might be because they and other people are laughing at you, certainly not with you, because you don't know why anybody's smiling or laughing. Okay? So then all a person has to do is there has to be a little tiny misunderstanding, or the person just has to be a little weird and laugh about different things from you than you do. So then that's going to activate the potential threat rule. And then last night I heard him say, and I know I've talked to this person much more than he has, and I have never had the impression he has made fun of me. He's always super nice. And you know, I was gonna help him set up a dating profile, but then every time I was coming, because I needed to take photos of him, but it was winter, so all the sun had already set, so we're gonna do that soon. Yeah, I mean, it's wild. It's so wild that actually came out of his mouth. Sometimes, yeah, I feel like he's just, you know, he's trying to like sort of fuck with me. And it wasn't, and he didn't say, I feel like, he's like, sometimes or maybe he did, but it wasn't in a humble sense, like, sometimes I feel like that, but guys, that might be complete bullshit. Because of course that's activating other rules in other people's heads. If you hear that someone is a potential threat, or makes fun of you, or is, you know, whatever, just not pleasant, whatever, then maybe that person is unpleasant. So now that has primed your belief, your reaction that person is unpleasant, or maybe triggers it already if your threshold is low enough. But in any case, it lowers sort of the threshold, or raises the activity closer to or past the threshold to activate that belief that he is a threat. So that's all I need to do. I need to teach people they kind of go hand in hand, because in order to learn that these biases exist, that these rules we already have these pre-programmed rules in our brain, and just look at a list of cognitive biases, and they're not always phrased like if this then that, but you can figure out the phrasing. So for instance, the the recency effect, or the recency illusion, is if you've seen, well, actually me, I often go to if then because I've been working on it. But the recency illusion is when you perceive a greater abundance or importance or significance of a thing than there actually is, because it happened recently. So maybe we can, is this right? Am I making this up? Am I confusing it with the availability heuristic? Because I know there's like one thing where, for instance, if you there's one thing where if you see, let's say you see 10, okay, here's an example, and here's a good feminist example. So men after a work meeting, will often overestimate how much the women spoke. And I don't know I can't remember what that's called, but that's an example of when you don't expect something, or when you expect less of something and you see or perceive more of it, then, because let's say the woman speaks more than you were expecting, then you're going to have the impression that she spoke maybe more than you, but actually she just spoke more than you're expecting. I didn't explain that particularly well. If you aren't used to seeing black people and you see 20 people and 2 of them are black, And then a researcher asks you, hey, how many black people were there? You might say 4 or 5 because you kind of focused on them. There's also, if a terrorist event happens, let's say it happens every 100 years. I mean, obviously it happens much often than that, but let's say some event happens every 100 years. And everybody knows that this happens every 100 years. But when it happens, well, no, not if they know. But let's take a terrorist event. It's kind of irregular. It's kind of unpredictable when these things happen. Right after one happens, of course, everybody's going to rate the probability of one happening higher. Okay, you're going to tell me that's reasonable because, of course, they might attack again. And I guess you would kind of be right. I fucked up that explanation, I think, because I think that is an example of something. There's also, like, we tend to we underestimate the amount of car accidents and overestimate the amount of plane accidents, except, of course, we've learned that the fact that we do this. We've learned that you're more likely to die in a car. You know, everybody says that. You're more likely to die in a car than in a plane. But we keep telling each other that because it's so easy to forget, because a plane, it's such a more traumatic thing. It's covered in the news. And I think that might be the availability heuristic. And so you think that it happens so much more. And also, when you drive, you don't. Anyway, I'm way off track here. I'm sorry. But if I can teach you guys to learn those rules, that those things exist, then when you have the output of that rule, so you have why, one of your voices, one of your rules is saying why, then you wonder, is this voice that rule? Is this rule that rule? Am I just saying why because of X? Am I just thinking that planes, or believing that planes are more of a threat because I see those tragedies more often than I experience the plane? Because you probably read about plane accidents. I mean, unless you like travel for work, a lot of people probably read more about plane accidents than actually are in planes. Whereas it's the opposite for cars. So you go, I'm thinking that planes are so scary and worse. Is it actually just because I read about it more in the news? Okay. So you have to have the humility to learn those rules, and then the humility to be primed for when, so I've got a voice in my head that says, if I say Y, then make sure it's not just X, because we know about this if X then Y rule, and it's not a good rule. So if Y is shouted, check to see whether X is the only thing. And that rule, it's always ready to go. Not always, obviously. I'm sure I miss lots of my mistakes. But it's often ready to go, ready to go, ready to go. Because I tell you, I so fucking racist. I had to like whisper that. I mean, and every time like something that like an Arab like on the train or whatever does, because the Arabs are like the equivalent. Oh my gosh. I hope, I mean, nobody's watching this. Okay. Blacks in the U.S. have a relationship to the U.S., a history in the U.S., and are often seen as being the lower income community into the whole hip hop and all that stuff. And so that's kind of the Arabs here, okay? I don't know why I mentioned the hip hop thing. That was a stupid voice. I shouldn't have let that out of my mouth. That was a stupid voice, and I didn't have another voice to say, why is that the important thing, the hip hop thing? That's not actually like the important detail of sort of the equivalency. But anyway, so yeah, you're drug dealers and will be, you know, I'm not saying, you know. So there's that association in the brain. And my brain loves associations, right? So I've got sort of these associations, and so I'll see like an Arab teen like put his feet up on the chair on the metro, and that will make me angrier than if it's a white teen. And so when Y happens, so I have the output of anger, and physically I'm staring at his feet, so it's pretty clear to me where this anger is coming from. Rather than going, oh gosh, they're the worst, or oh gosh, what a scoundrel, I've got a voice that goes, if you get angry, then look at like why. Look at why you got angry. and look at the person's skin color. And, well, this is a whole bunch of voices. But the ensemble of these voices gets me to imagine that the person is white, and I feel a different reaction. I'm like, ah, oh, fuck me. It still bothers me, but like the white person doing it. But I feel differently about it, and it's a less angry sort of disapproval. So I realized that, and that doesn't mean. And then so now I have to be careful. If he does something else, I better not like lose it and say, oh, and just accept all these other these bad voices that I had that said that he was problematic. And so I pay extra careful attention. So if I interact with him, I've got voices going, look for the good, look for something where you can relate to him, connect. And so then I'll notice that like the person will, smiles nicely at some moment, and I'll be like, okay, just use it, go ahead, yes, use it, and smash out that voice that was trying to be angry because a teenager was being a teenager. And that's what happens. That's like affluenza, right? I mean, sorry, you don't see the relationship because that was not clear, but Brock, there's the affluenza kid, and then there's also the swimmer Brock. So Brock's like family and friends were probably totally convinced that he did not deserve much of a punishment. They're like, oh man, yeah, he fucked up, blah blah blah, he made a mistake, he's a human being, he makes a mistake, whatever. Whereas, of course, women who have been trying to fight against this culture of rape, well, they see the absolute devil, of course, and they're sickened by anybody that would try to justify it, of course. And if you switch those people, they would be reacting sort of the same way. They would be acting the same way as the other person who had been in that place. So if, for instance, it was Brock's parents, but now let's say we're talking about it was a black dude and it was of someone in their family. Now they want him to have the death sentence, right? And they truly believe that this person is more evil and worse. And they will find any way to sort of justify that, even though they don't know that person. And it could be the exact same situation as their son. I mean, their son was a bad person. Yeah. But I don't think there's as clear of a distance between him and someone who doesn't do that. It might just be one little voice that wasn't active in his brain. One little tiny voice. If you're next to a dumpster having sex with someone, there's a problem. If this person is unconscious, there's a problem. That's not a voice that exists. And like, there's a lot of people that are not seen as being as evil as Brock. And that voice doesn't really, okay, if unconscious. Were they fully well, yeah, but then maybe like, how, maybe he wasn't really sure if they were unconscious, thought they were just kind of, whatever. And so Brock's family, they're able to find all these, what you might consider excuses, but are actually just the rules, the voices that exist in his brain. Whereas you're going, if rape, then evil fucking monster. Which, yeah, sounds like a perfectly fair rule, and I agree. I'm just talking about why the difference is. But then, of course, you might know someone who's been accused of something, and they kind of did it, but you also kind of found a way to not excuse it, but to justify it. So if we had the humility to realize that we have these biases, these rules, if I know the person, then look for the good, for instance. If I don't know the person, then assume the worst. If you know that you have these rules, and you have the humility to try to inhibit those rules when you notice them, and you have the humility to notice them and to look for, oh, am I only saying this because of this? Do I actually know this person that I'm so ready to punish? Because my brain doesn't really need to know the person. The less I know the person, the more my brain's going to be ready to punish. But that's not actually something that I agree with on an intellectual level. So I need to change that. And I have the humility to change that processing, to change the way that I react and the way that I interpret things. Or at least what the ultimate behavioral output is and the ultimate belief output. I think that was incredibly clear. I feel like it wasn't clear, but also I think I'm gonna watch this and be like, yeah, that was clear. So I'm pretty happy about that. And are you happy about that? Huh? Oh no, I said it's clear. Oh, did you hear what I said? Or yeah, no, it's not clean. But are you happy about this work that I just did? Because I basically realized my mission is a lot simpler than I thought.
Already?
Yeah. Isn't that wonderful?
Nice. Can I see the video?
Oh no, it's 35 minutes long. You have a memoir to do.
Mm-mm.
All right, cool.